people don't feel like imposters because they're not capable. It is actually their capability that makes them feel like imposters. The higher you get, the more pressure there is, the more ambiguity there is. And ambiguity is rocket fuel for imposter feelings.
We'll say that again.
I think we mistake distress for discipline. Shame is a very expensive fuel source.
That's extraordinary, what you just said. Erin, welcome back to the podcast. How good to see you again.
Thank you, Pod. It's great to see you too.
You're the first person we've invited back, and that's not a coincidence because your episode we recorded last year, 2025, has been one of our most watched episodes ever. I think the word imposter might have something to do with it, and then the word Erin Buttermore might be the other part to it. So glad to have you back.
Oh, it's a huge honour. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So for folks who might be tuning to this episode for the first time, last time we had you on, we discussed the foundations of what I was calling imposter syndrome, and you corrected me to say it's imposter phenomena, and why it's a phenomena, not a syndrome. We discussed why it differs in men and women. We discovered this notion of toxic attribution in terms of how people think about success was a bit of luck, but failure was my fault. And I've heard a few people actually repeat that back to me since going, I do that. I didn't know I did that till I heard Erin Buttermore say it. And then you finished with something that had quite a profound effect on many listeners. And that was, you said, imposter feelings are the price we pay for growth, which was a huge comment you made. And a lot of people messaged us afterwards going, that makes sense to me now that I've heard her say that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad it's resonated with people.
Yeah, absolutely. So this time I thought, let's go a bit deeper. Let's go into the notion of capability. And I know this is part of your study and this is part of your expertise, which I'm really happy with. The idea that a lot of folks who listen to this show are very capable, very, very competent. Many of them are very successful in terms of business founders or senior leaders, or they have their own manufacturing or trading business or something, or indeed they're just successful in whatever way you define that. I also know that capacity and capability is a two-edged sword for many of us. And for some people, the more capable I am, the more fraudulent I actually feel. And for some of us, the more capable people tell me I am, the more I actually work to hide it, which is a perverse irony, but I've seen it happen enough times. So I'd love to talk to you about that. So with that in mind, what will our audience get from this conversation today?
Well, today we're going to be talking about a really curious paradox that you've touched on, that people don't feel like imposters because they're not capable. It is actually their capability that makes them feel like imposters. Yeah. So if you're the kind of person who responds to your imposter feelings by over-functioning, over-delivering, rushing to the rescue, working extra hard, doing everything that you need to do, then you say to yourself, well, that didn't count because I had to work twice as hard as anybody else to do that.
Wow.
Or on the flip side, if you're the kind of person who procrastinates or self-handicaps, who leaves yourself an escape hatch and still somehow pulls it off, you say, well, that didn't count either because I didn't do it properly. So you can't get it right either way. You're always stuck, and your success never quite makes it into admissible evidence. And that means that you've got a flawed accounting system.
I love that. I really love what you just said. I had a conversation at about 6 a.m. this morning with a colleague of mine who is in England, and she and I are both on this doctoral program we're doing together. And in my mind, she is the most articulate, intelligent person in our group, full stop, if not in my whole circle of people I know. Yourself excluded, of course, Erin, when I say that. And she was just talking about almost what you've just said, the amount of time she has spent in the last couple of weeks doing X, Y, and Z and feeling like she's got nowhere, and really talking down the effort because the outcome, I put in so much effort and the outcome's only X, which is exactly what you said. Her accounting system is flawed. And she does say that she feels like an imposter most of the time, which at least she understands that. But that time and effort and outcome is a very interesting dynamic that you just mentioned.
Yes, I see it so often.
So what happens when, like you said, imposter feelings are the price we pay for growth? a lot of us in midlife are not beginners. We are well on our way. And in fact, we may well be at the top of our, whatever our game is, whatever game that is. So what happens when that growth just doesn't stop?
Well, I think the imposter feelings get more nuanced and more sophisticated. So early in your career, it's pretty obvious. I don't feel experienced enough. I'm not good enough. Someone's going to find out I'm not supposed to be here. At more senior levels, the stakes get a lot higher. So you've made your way into this job that you could scarcely have imagined doing a few years ago, and you think you've fluked your way into it, and suddenly everybody is looking to you for the answers. They're relying on you. And you've got this inner sense that there is no grown-up coming to rescue you. So the ambiguity gets really high. Early on in your career, you've got all these external markers of success. You've got performance reviews, you've got grades, you've got chartered accreditations, or you've got more senior people giving you feedback on your performance. And suddenly, you are the one that everyone else is looking to. You're the one to make the judgment calls. You're the one trying to influence a decision where there's really no clear outcome. And so you're hoping that somebody will come and rescue you from this, but they won't. The cavalry is not going to come charging over the hillside for you. You're the one sitting there in the chair, and it's this terrible sense of I'm responsible for everything. So we kind of tell ourselves that if we just get that next promotion or that next credential, then the imposter feelings will go away. And they don't. The higher you get, the more pressure there is, the more ambiguity there is. And ambiguity is rocket fuel for imposter feelings.
I did not know that. Like, as you're saying that, I'm just thinking about all the various leaders that I've known over the years, but particularly, say, the last 18 months in this whole rush to become an AI native businesses. That so many organizations around the world are not just embracing AI, trying to become an AI business. And the context is shifting like sand everywhere. The media is loud about AI-driven productivity leads to job losses, and that hasn't quite turned out to be true yet, but there's a concern with that. And a lot of the leaders I talk to in this particular space are grappling with, who am I to try and figure this out? Like, no one has figured this out yet. Therefore I can't be the person who figures it out. And I hadn't actually twigged that kind of dealing with ambiguity is actually also could be fired up by imposterism. I had never thought about that.
And Jacinda Ardern's memoirs have just come out. She was Prime Minister of New Zealand, held the highest office in her country, was renowned around the world. And she speaks very clearly in that. And I have to admit, I haven't yet read it, so please don't quiz me on this too far. But she does talk about imposter feelings and how that held her back, but also drove her forward.
Which is what you talked about. Like you said, imposter are the price we pay for growth. If we tune into the ability or the opportunity to grow, that's an important caveat, because we don't always do that. Which brings me to this notion of over-delivering and burning out, and the kind of a perverse loop of, going back to your comment about accounting loops, if we're going to exert ourselves to over-deliver to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of doubting ourselves, or to mitigate against that, it can lead to a burnout potential issue. Talk to me about that.
Well, capable people are very good at delivering. They're very good at absorbing complexity. They're good at bridging the gap between two people who are not communicating clearly, or multiple others who are not communicating clearly. They rush to the rescue. They fix things. And the organisations they work for love that, because the work gets done. So nobody's saying to the person who keeps showing up and over-delivering, could you please stop rescuing that under-resourced project? They're saying, thank God you're here.
Yeah.
And so that kind of praise is addictive, and that's also dangerous, because you become useful for the wrong reasons and for very codependent reasons. So you keep showing up, you keep delivering, you keep filling all the gaps. It all falls to you. The more capable you are, the more people give you. And the more you cope with that, the more they give you. And eventually the entire organisation has constructed its risk system around your nervous system. And occasionally you send up a flag to say this is not working, but because it apparently is working, you keep delivering They keep saying, thanks very much, next please. And it's only when you either burn out or opt out that the organisation realises this key person dependency that it's come to rely upon. Now, in an ideal world, you would get some schadenfreude and see them collapse without the structural support of you being there. What tends to happen in reality is that they hire 3 people to replace the role that you've been filling single-handedly for years.
Then you're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So burnout versus self-handicap. Is there a choice?
I think we do different things in different situations, but self-handicapping is a protective mechanism. If I don't try, then I never have to find out that I wasn't really good enough. And it can look like undercommitment or a lack of ambition. It has an opportunity cost attached for the person. It has a cost to the organisation because they don't tap into the talent that they might otherwise have done. They have people stuck at middle levels or leaving the job because they do opt out to avoid that burnout. And people are performing this mental calculus of, if I'm struggling at this level, how could I possibly take on any more?
Can I grab your attention for a second? I hope you're enjoying the conversation. We're a new podcast and we're growing pretty fast, so thank you everybody for listening or watching. Can I ask you to subscribe or press like on whatever platform you're listening or watching this to, because that helps us to keep growing, and then it helps us to give us shows like this. Back to the episode. You've talked a little bit in the past about how folks who are deemed to be successful or seen to be successful by others, they may not feel it themselves, often interpret their own evidence of competence actually as incompetence. And I was thinking about this the other day because a few of us in our WhatsApp group who are doing this study together were talking about the more I'm learning, the more I'm realising I know nothing. Now, there's a truth in that because, of course, you open the door towards a whole lot of area of study or whatever the competency is, and you realise, oh, this is a whole new area. So, of course, I didn't know that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And that there's logic to that. But for some of us in the conversation, it felt overwhelming. And I remember one person saying, like, I just feel like I should give up because I'm working so hard and I just realising I'm on this hamster wheel and I'll never get over it, which sounds to me more of what you talk about, which is the more evidence of my competence is the more evidence of my incompetence.
Yes, that's exactly right. So if it was really hard, then I threw too much at it. I worked too hard. If it was easy, then it must have been easy. So anybody could have done it. If someone praises me, they're either just being kind or they didn't know the full story. If I pulled it off under pressure, well, I just got lucky. And if I make one mistake, that's obvious evidence that I'm not good enough.
You sound like you've heard that many times before. What's the first step when you hear that?
Well, it's to ask people, what evidence would you need to see that you are meeting standards? What would be enough? If you were applying that to somebody else, what would you say to them? You wouldn't say, oh no, you didn't really deserve that accolade. You didn't do a good job of the meeting because you had other people helping you or you worked really hard on it. You would say, no, you exercised your judgment. You used your initiative. You brought your experience. You did what needed to be done. You did the thing. You did it. Great. Good job. So we need to turn that lens onto ourselves.
When you're coaching folks in this space, I think what you just said is really useful. You know, what standard would be good enough for you, or what X would be good enough for you. When someone realizes for the first time that, oh, I'm holding a standard that's impossible, or I'm holding a standard that my colleagues would say to me is just silly or stupid or whatever. But a huge part of me also goes, you've always done that and you've been rewarded, and that's why you're here, is because of your ability to do that. Yet you're in that moment able to say to them, and that's what's causing all of these overwhelm or whatever else is being caused for you. What's the step from that conversation to them starting to let go that need to have such huge standards or such great outcomes or such massive amount of contribution or whatever the answer is?
I think we mistake distress for discipline.
Say that again.
I think we mistake distress for discipline. We are so hard on ourselves and we think that that's what we need to do to keep us sharp. It's to stop us from becoming lazy or arrogant. It's what gives us our edge. It's what keeps driving us forward to these outcomes. And yes, we do achieve the outcomes, but at what cost? So we've internalised the message somewhere along the line. Perhaps our parents or our teachers or a really overbearing sports coach drilled this into us when we were small. And at some point we've taken the baton and we have become our own inner critic and our own worst enemy. So we keep internalising these messages and telling ourselves, this is what I need to do to be successful. You can keep your ambition. You can keep your high standards. You can keep your seriousness, but you don't have to keep the internal bullying that you're doing to yourself.
That's a brilliant phrase. I love that. So you're saying that at a certain point of our life, we have to realise we are the people causing our own distress in pursuit of, inverted commas, discipline. And we can also achieve discipline without being our biggest distress causer.
That's right. To some extent, we can never hope to do it all. Life is not a bingo card where you're going to stamp every box before you finish. You have to accept that not everything is going to get done. And so you're probably doing more than you need to do already. And to add to that, the more you stride in and overfunction and take control of the room, the more you are depriving the others around you of their opportunity to shine. And I had a very wise leader once say to me, your whole focus changes once you shift from achieving through self to achieving through others. Yeah. And in our individualistic society, our individualistic culture, it's all about being the hero, about being the person who pulled it off single-handedly, who rescued everything. But that's not the way we get things done. And when you're leading at these very senior levels, you are leading complex systems, and it's about how you can harness the other people and the resources within the system and enable them and empower them to do their best. It's not about you being the saviour who comes to fix everything.
It's interesting. We had Anis Haddad on this show recently. And Anis is someone who's French originally, lives in Singapore, a very successful entrepreneur in his own right. When he sold his business, I think it operated in 35 countries before he sold it. And then for a range of reasons, he moved to Singapore, which is where he lives now. And he does a lot of work with CEOs and founders and a range of different things, but particularly folks who are in the 50-plus age category, which is why we had him on the show, because they're moving into a different phase of leadership legacy. But he made a comment that I kind of was aware of, but I hadn't thought about, and it talks to what you're saying. He referenced a range of different books, Good to Great, as example, or 7 Habits, or those kind of famous books. And his point was all written by white Anglo-Saxon men in their 30s or early 40s. And his point is they were all still in achievement mode when they're writing about leadership, which became the way to lead for a long time, because they hadn't moved into the notion of leading through others as being the biggest and most successful way to lead. And when I stepped back and thought about it, whilst I think the messages that come through the race books you talked about are still relevant, of course, but there's a message lost, which is this is not all about you. This can be about the wider we. And then the message that you're talking about is, and actually the wider we can take a lot of distress off your shoulders if you allow it to.
That's right. It's like you're trying to be the conductor of the orchestra and play every single instrument all at the same time. You can't do it.
It's pretty exhausting.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word cost a few minutes ago. You said the cost for the individual is the physical or overwhelmed cost. The cost for the organisation is often other people don't get a chance to step up, or there's a single point of dependency, or there's a single point of insurance risk, if you want to call it that. What's the cost for the wider, like for the family of the person? What's that cost?
Oh, there's a huge ripple effect. One of the behaviours that we see with people trying to cope with their imposter feelings is a constant need for reassurance or rumination. So they're coming home, they're pacing, they're going over and over their decisions. Or they're coming straight home and going into their home office and working all evening to prepare for whatever's happening the next day. And then they're coming out and unloading on the spouse about it. Or maybe they're getting prickly or defensive because they're feeling so tightly wound all the time that everything becomes really difficult and it becomes pervasive. They're waking up in the middle of the night. They're on the family holiday and they've brought the laptop with them because they can't let go of this need for control.
I'm smiling. I'm remembering once being asked to coach someone who's now in a global head of treasury role in the US in a well-known company. But when I met him first, he wasn't there. And I remember this person asked me to speak to his wife for input to the coaching piece. And I had a 5-minute conversation because it's not an everyday thing to do that. But her comment to me was, I take him on a cruise once a year to a particular part of the world. I said, oh, why? Did you like that part of the world? No, I hate it. I said, why do you go there? It's the only part of the world where he can't get phone signal. But your example of family holiday, she goes, everything else we go to is ruined because of his obsession with and just not his inability to let go. Now, in his case, he was highly perfectionistic as well as having massive spikes in imposterism and quite brilliant. Like one of the most competent people in the world. Again, when you think of where he is today, that makes sense. But his inability to switch off and relax had a profound impact on his team. He had a 64% turnover rate in his team, which is why I was asked to come in, but also in his family as well. So a huge ripple effect.
Yes. And those traits are not uncommon together. Imposter feelings, perfectionism, overwork, brilliance. They go along together. They're enmeshed. They are things that feed each other.
What happens to the person, be it they are in a senior leadership role, or maybe they run their own business and they have 5 or 10 people working with them, or maybe they're deemed to be the 2IC in the organization because they're so competent. What happens to that person when they overfunction for a long period of time, like when they really work massively hard to deliver because that notions of doubt sits there the whole time?
Well, for them, it's a vicious cycle. So they have a task assigned, they feel the impending stress of, oh no, I'm going to stuff it up this time, everyone's going to find out. They start overworking and over-preparing and rushing to do everything. And it's delivered perfectly and beautifully and everybody praises them and they think, oh no, now the stakes are even higher and I'm going to have to work even harder. And the only way I pulled that off was burning myself out. What happens around them is that their team gets kind of shunted to the side. They're trying to do the work and they're getting it back with red pen all over it because this person is over-functioning and showing up and doing all of the jobs all at once. The product is it's good, but it could have been better if you had the whole team doing it. It could have been an opportunity to develop and grow others in the team. It could have been an opportunity to bring in multiple perspectives and make something bigger and better, something that's greater than the sum of its parts by harnessing all of these different aspects of the system. And the organisation has no knowledge that any of this has ever happened. All they see is the output. Thanks so much for your work. Great. Here's the next thing. Yeah. On we go.
What's the link? You said there's a strong link between perfectionism and imposterism. As you say that, I can imagine some of the links as to why, but can you illustrate that for us?
Well, we don't know if it's causative or just correlated. So it could be that you're a perfectionist to begin with, and so you start to feel like an imposter because you could never possibly meet the standards that you have set yourself. Or it could be that you feel like an imposter, so you think, well, if I make this absolutely perfect, then no one will ever have to know how terrible I am at this.
And for those who are not fully sure, the word perfectionism, or I'm a perfectionist, comes from the idea of in order for me to have, for my esteem to be met, for me to feel okay, for me to not be at risk, if you want to use that word, what I produce has got to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, then I'm at risk or I'm less of a human being in my eyes, but I'm concerned in their eyes also. Is that a fair?
That's right. There is a strong fear of being judged. from people experiencing the imposter phenomenon.
So your point is, which comes first? Don't know, but the combination is pretty hard for the person and their team.
Indeed.
Yeah. Ambition. You said ambition in our early life is often about me.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of folks in this show talk about their realizations that, 40, 45, 50 plus, their ambition changes. And in fact, a lot of the theme of this show is reinvention, and therefore to actively pursue new ambitions as you grow older. What have you noticed about ambition changing from a imposterism perspective, and where does that work well? Where is our concern? How do people not let go of ambitions, etc.?
Well, I think ambition becomes more authentic in midlife. So for the early part of your career, you're focused on all of these external markers of success. Get the job, get the promotion, buy the house, build the business, get results, show them, prove something, show that you are worth what you've signed on to do. And then in midlife, we start asking ourselves these more probing questions. Was that really worth it? Is it still what I really want, or have I just become very good at getting it? Am I willing to keep the trade-off for the next part of my life? And that's an awful transition to go through, because some part of you might still be clinging to these past ambitions. You're thinking, I haven't filled in my bingo card yet. I haven't done the thing. Have I achieved enough? How do I know if I'm successful? And then you're shifting to things that are more about legacy and purpose and passion that may be less visible to others around you. And it can look like you've dropped the ball, and it can feel like you've dropped the ball, but it's actually giving you a lot more purpose and meaning. And then imposter feelings on top of that can make you go into this spiral of, well, none of it counted. None of it was worth anything. I faked the whole thing. I achieved nothing, and it means nothing. So it's kind of globally contemptuous. You've turned it on yourself. And what I think people need to get to is this ability to look at the past and say, well, I did all of that, but now I'm not sure it was worth the cost, and I would choose differently now, as opposed to it should all go in flames and none of it meant anything.
Is there a sense of fantasy? What I mean by that is, if there is a long-term build-up of overwhelm or tiredness, exhaustion from the using my capability but over-functioning to make sure I deliver, at some stage, I'm imagining, for some of us at least, there's a fantasy building up of, wouldn't it be great to not have to do this? And how do I escape from doing this? Yet there's an equal pull to go, well, the bingo card, to use your language, is not full yet, so I got to keep going. And then there's a mixture of guilt or guilt from, was it worth it? Got the cost. Like, that must be an extraordinary mixture of different perspectives and emotions at the same time.
Gosh, what a roiling maelstrom of things to go through all at once. And yes, that escape fantasy presents itself. But no matter how far you travel, you can't get away from yourself. So if you haven't addressed the unhelpful pattern of behaviour, it will keep cropping up to follow you. So this idea that I can somehow outrun the imposter feelings, I won't feel like that anymore.
Yeah.
If you chuck in your job and you go and live on a beach, maybe you'll be happy. Maybe you'll be very hungry. Maybe you'll sit there feeling like an imposter as a beach bum, that actually I'm not meant to be here. I'm meant to be doing something and making a contribution and giving my talents to the world, and people underestimate me and I feel like an imposter in that sense now. So I think you've got to distinguish between this fantasy of escape and a genuine change of direction. So ask yourself, am I running towards something that's very meaningful to me? Or am I just trying to get away from the unpleasant feelings?
They're very different scenarios, aren't they?
Very different.
It's the classic on a Sunday night. How do you feel about going to work the next day? Or at least when we used to go to work physically. We don't all go to an office anymore like we used to. But that classic sense of a Sunday evening, where are you relative to going to work tomorrow on a Monday? And is that feeling contributing to your desire to go and find a different job? And is a different job something I want to move towards, to your question, versus I want to get out of here? And the second one will drive you to looking for a suboptimal job for sure. You're just replacing the colour office with different people in a different office. That's all you're doing.
That's right. And I think imposter feelings can really exacerbate this scenario, because if you feel like an imposter, you might be running to the next job because you're afraid of being found out in the one that you're in. Or on the flip side, you might stay in something that's absolutely deadening to you because you don't want to be a beginner and start over again, because it seems like you would never be good enough for that next step. So either way, you've got to ask yourself the question, what would I do if I really believed myself to be capable of the next step?
What would I do if I really believed myself to be capable of the next step? What kind of answers do you find people give you when you ask that question?
Usually they start obfuscating.
I was going to say, debating you. Right?
Giving me a lot of reasons why they would not be ready for the next step. Right. So then we try to externalise it again and look at it objectively. So if you had this CV from this man in his 50s who has done all of these things and you were considering him for a role, doing something or other, what would you think if you were on the interview panel? Would you choose this person? And often they say, well, yes, but. It's hard to let go of these feelings. They're serving this self-protective mechanism for us.
Remind us, for folks who didn't hear the first time, because you discussed this at length the first time we had you in the show, what are imposter feelings protecting us from?
From feeling not good enough, and yet at the same time, perversely, they make us feel not good enough. So there's no winning.
No, it's a lose-lose situation, isn't it?
That's right.
So let's just plant it into the eyes of the listener, or the ears of the listener who's watching or listening to this right now. So imagine I'm in my 40s. I've been working really, really hard for 20 plus years. I've been rewarded that time and time again. I'm the person who works late on a Friday night and early on a Sunday morning to get ready for the week. I'm the person who comes in when there's drama and sorts it out. I'm the person who always delivers. I might have got feedback along the way how good I am, or I might have got feedback on how hard I'm working just to make sure I take a rest. I might have a spouse who tells me that I'm not ever present. I'm physically here, but I'm not present. I'm thinking about something else. And I'm now starting to recognize that. And I'm now starting to go, I want to do something about this, because this just can't keep going the way it is. And I would imagine that's the starting point. Things can't keep going the way they are. What the change is, I've got no idea, but things can't keep going the way they are, because I can't keep going the way I am. What's the conversation I need to have with you?
There are two conversations. One is about the internal experience. So I ask people to reflect on a recent success, something they felt went reasonably well. So maybe it was a meeting, a presentation, a difficult conversation that they had to have. And then write down the reasons you usually give yourself for why it doesn't count. And then ask yourself, would I accept those reasons from somebody else? Would I buy it? And the answer is usually no, you wouldn't. That would be deranged to think that it was not good enough. It didn't count because you prepared for the conversation or you were winging it. None of that is real.
Yep.
You actually did the job. You did what needed to be done. So that's the first part. The second part is in the functional behaviours. So exactly what are you doing? Is it overwork? Is it micromanagement? Is it constantly seeking reassurance? Is it getting prickly or defensive around your work? So we zero in on that and we say, what can we change about that? Some people feel they need a huge break. It's like getting rid of all the junk food in the house so that you won't slip up on your diet. So they actually have to give themselves a couple of weeks off, turn the phone off, and realise that nothing falls apart without them. Other people are not quite ready to let go to that extent. So in that case, it's about dialing down. So what's one thing that I could drop or delegate? And when I delegate it, really let it go. Not hover over the person, making sure they do it exactly the way that I would have done it.
Talk to that last bit. I think that's the hardest part. I'm thinking of a few different people I have in my mind who can do everything you just said, except for the let go.
You have to put down the mental load, because otherwise you're depriving the other person of their autonomy, of their capacity to get better, of their achievement through doing the task. And you're trying to do it and not do it at the same time. You've become Schrodinger's cat. You both exist and don't exist as the owner of this task. So being accountable is not the same as being responsible. And a lot of leaders at this level have done racy matrices. They know the difference, and yet they need to learn to apply it to themselves. So I trust that this person will get the job done, and I am willing to give them enough time and latitude to do it. And maybe I'll build enough gates into the process so that I can review it somewhere along the line to help manage my own anxiety. But I need to recognise when I am anxiously over-managing something, when I'm polishing it to such a fine degree that people are going to slip on the floors and dislocate a hip. You've got to be able to let things go that are good enough.
And I think that's the hardest part, is that last one. And I've seen it happen so many times, and maybe I might have been guilty of it myself along the way, who knows. But the idea of, because when I look at leaders that I have worked with in my coaching career, a lot of folks iterate on the way. So they don't necessarily plan out on day one, the end output's going to look like this. But along the way, they realize what the next iteration needs to be. So for the team who've been given autonomy, that can be very hard, because the iteration is coming along the way and the leaders coming and going, no, that's not right. Now, it could be right. It could be enough. It could be fine, but it's not right in the sense of being perfectly right. But the leader didn't know that up front because they hadn't seen it. So the receiving impact is every time we come to a milestone or a check gate, they change it. Whereas the leader's going, I'm not changing it. It just hasn't reached the end point that we need to get to. And they're very different perspectives, but the end output is still the same. The leader's not letting go and the team are getting exhausted.
Yes, and it's really hard to work for a leader like that, because you feel like you've done your best work, and what you hear is it wasn't good enough. So then maybe you start to feel like an imposter as well. Like this strategy has worked for me before. I've done work like this and it's been well received, and now I keep getting it back to redo over and over. So I think the leader has a role there in setting the climate of this is the way we work. This is going to be an iterative process, admitting some vulnerability up front of, I don't quite know what good looks like yet. This is an emerging and evolving field. We are figuring it out together as we go along. And that means that we'll need to iterate this a few times. So what looks good here might not be what is necessary down the track, because everything is changing. But I'm going to keep you posted, and I'm going to keep giving you feedback that I'm hearing about what this needs to look like and how my thinking is evolving. And I'm also going to invite your input into what good looks like. Let's co-create it together. It's not all on me as the leader to set the vision and tell everybody this is exactly how every step will be done.
We're talking about high performance here, like in this piece, and you've mentioned discipline and distress, and I love that. Let's not confuse distress for discipline. We know that discipline can reach high performance, and that's why that would feel like that. So there's another couple of words that often are linked with performance that I think a lot of us underestimate, and self-compassion is one of the phrases that are being used more and more related to high performance and imposterism and perfectionism and all of those traits. The word self-compassion has a tonality to it that sounds like soft. But I know enough about the work that you do that you would disagree with that notion. Tell us why self-compassion and high standards and the inner standard are so intrinsically linked.
Self-compassion has a terrible PR problem. I'll concede that right away. For a lot of high-performing leaders, self-compassion sounds like taking yourself off to a day spa and dropping off all your standards. That's not it at all. What we're talking about here is a reflective tool that allows you to look objectively at what you did or didn't do and assess a situation in a way that doesn't make you defensive or anxious or ashamed or perfectionistic, none of which is a very great learning state, by the way. The research shows on self-compassion that we actually get better outcomes when we're kinder to ourselves, because instead of saying, this mistake was catastrophic, I'm so terrible, I need to self-flagellate before anybody else can punish me for this awful thing that I did, we're saying to ourselves, okay, what happened here? What was mine to own? What lessons have I learned from this? And what does this mean or not mean? Because making a mistake can mean that you were overworked, you were under-resourced, you were compensating for a broken system. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were a fraud and you were not good enough. So assigning the appropriate amount of meaning to a mistake helps you learn from it. I think shame is a very expensive fuel source.
That's extraordinary, what you just said. So.
Well, we use shame to drive ourselves. It's part of the internal bullying that I spoke about earlier. We think it gives us an edge. We think it stops us from becoming lazy or arrogant. But it doesn't. It makes us shrink into ourselves. We are crushed, and we're doing it in this kind of strange way of self-protectionism. So if I set my standards impossibly high, nobody can ever criticise me. If I'm completely self-sufficient, then I won't ever need anyone and I won't have to be vulnerable. If I anticipate every objection, then nobody can ever refute what I have to say. If I can keep things perfect, then I'll be safe. But we turn that on ourselves, and these become standards that are impossible for any creature alive to ever meet. Nobody can do these things. And I think men have this particular layer of needing to be seen, to be in control, to know everything, to be competent, to have it all figured out. We still look to men as the natural leaders in society. So if you don't feel like that inside, it's a very jarring feeling. And then one of the ways that people deal with that is to turn shame on themselves, to tell themselves they're defective for not feeling confident enough.
I think what you've just said is one of the most, I'm going to use the word very consciously here, one of the most profound things we've heard in this show since we started. Like just that last couple of sentences you said. Shame is the most expensive fuel source we have. That's extraordinary. And when I step back and listen to it, and I think about the various guests we've had in this show who are experts, either in their own lived experiences or indeed expert in helping people to treat it, what I'm reminded of is the link between my high competency that I've used time and time again and the self-flagellating I go through when something goes wrong, and the notion of self-compassion as the antidote for that. Shame is the cloak that wraps around all of it that actually prevents the self-compassion from kicking in. And if I move away from the kind of therapeutic type of language to more of a performance type of language for a second, what self-compassion is allowing you to do is, in the absence of self-flagellating, you're opening up a space for objective conversations on what worked and what didn't. And then I can address what didn't, which is what performance is, right? Which is why this person is successful to begin with. But if you go through the motions of the self-flagellation and all of the because there's a latency that happens afterwards. You have the conversation, but the emotions don't go for hours. So you're sitting in that emotional state a long time after the conversation you've had with yourself. And that emotional state then ripples into other conversations and family dynamics and the meeting with the team 3 days later. Right? That stays there. But if we're able to understand that self-compassion is actually a performance tool that allows me to pause long enough to be objective, it actually allows me to come back on track far faster and potentially far better than I was before. So it's that fuel source I'm wasting through the notion of feeling ashamed is the same fuel source as getting in the way of returning to performance.
That's right. You can't put the wrong fuel in your engine. It jams up the whole thing.
We had Jessica Turton on here recently, a very, very different conversation to what you and I are having. She was talking about fuel source in terms of our bodies, and she said one of the most useful fuel sources, but a lot of us use, is alcohol. Like you got protein, fats and carbohydrates, and alcohol are the three fuel sources. What you're saying is shame is akin to the alcohol as a fuel source.
It's a great analogy. It works for a bit. It doesn't work forever.
Yeah.
But at what cost? What damage have you done to yourself by using that as your driver?
So what you're telling us is, if you're a man, and 65% of our listeners are men, and you're a man who's used to being, who is good at what you do, you're a performer, you may be a high performer, you may be a sustained high performer, you might be someone who's been promoted several times, or indeed you've set up your own business, or you're successful in whatever role you're doing. And at the same token, you know that behind the scene, you're doubting yourself along that path for a long period of time. What you're telling us is there's this really great tool that's at your disposal, that it might have a red or pink wrapping around it, i.e. you might think it's soft, but actually, if you open up the package, it is the tool that allows you to sustain that performance a lot longer, and you're exerting a lot less fuel and energy that's been wasted along the way.
That's right. Yes, I think self-compassion is a highly efficient psychological tool for performance.
So if I feel resistant to that, I'm sure many folks are sitting here and going, that sounds fine, Erin, but I ain't going on that path. But if I'm resistant to that, what's my first step?
Well, I'm not suggesting that you give yourself a free pass on every bad thing you've ever done. You can't turn into a sociopath and say, oh, well, I'm being so self-compassionate, so it didn't count.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is the 3-step process that Kristen Neff has outlined in her construct of self-compassion. It's about mindfulness. So noticing the ways that you speak to yourself, becoming more objective, viewing the situation from the outside, noticing the common humanity in this. This is the kind of mistake that everybody makes somewhere along the line. I'm suffering at the moment, and everybody experiences moments of suffering. This is what being a human is all about. And then the third piece is speaking to yourself the way you'd speak to a dear friend. Think about how you would talk to your favourite nephew if he had the same issue. What would you say to him?
I'm writing this down. So he's saying, take time to witness yourself, mindfulness. Take time to recognise what's it like to be a human in this experience. And then take time to note, if this was my friend asking me, what would I be telling them? They're the 3 steps.
That's right.
Okay, good. Have a go with that.
Great.
Come back to standard. Like you mentioned a few times, you say to folks, what standard would be enough for you, and helping them to realise that, no one can meet it. The irony here, of course, is setting high standards gets us to where we are. And setting high standards along the way has allowed us, for at least many of us, to perform at levels that other people deem to be great and get promoted. You're also just saying right now that self-compassion is not about giving yourself a free pass. That's not what it is at all. It's allowing yourself to acknowledge that this standard that I set myself hasn't been achieved, these are the circumstances, and if my friend was doing this, I'd be saying to them, that's perfectly fine. How do we reconcile setting standards going forward from that point? And how do we reconcile, or how do we think through, in this aspect of my job or life, standards are really important. In this aspect of my job or life, do you know what? They no longer are, to at least the level I used to hold them to. And how do I reconcile for that?
One of the things we often do is to expect the same high level of standards across everything. So I need to be calm, I need to be capable, I need to be emotionally stable, I need to be physically resilient and financially successful, and all of these things all at once, all the time, which nobody could possibly do. We need to set standards that are important for the important things. Not everything has to be perfect all the time. And most of us have had the experience of going to university and trying to get through all of the readings in a semester. And then you realise, well, the marks are only awarded for the assignments. So it's a bit like shifting your focus to, I'm going to do really well at the things that count most, and I'm not going to beat myself up for not reading every single paper that might have been thrown onto the reading list on a whim because the professor thought it was an interesting thing, not because they actually expected us to have that detailed knowledge.
Or indeed, they may not even have read it.
Indeed, that's right. So we can do this with our lives. What are the really important things to me here? What are the standards that would show success at work? In 12 months' time, what would I look back on and say it was really important that I did this? But also more broadly in our lives, what's really important to me here? Is it important that I be a good husband and a good father? And what does that look like? What do I need to do to achieve those things? And what's a reasonable balance that I can achieve? Because there are going to be trade-offs. You can't be everywhere all at once.
You mentioned university. You are a researcher studying imposterism. You're a human being who happens to be a researcher some of the time.
Allegedly.
Where does the research stop and start, and where does the human come in, and where's the overlap for you?
I do appreciate the irony of doing a PhD in the imposter phenomenon. I was drawn to this line of research because I see the pattern in myself. And it's not as if I'm walking around going, oh gosh, I'm so hopeless, I'm so incompetent. But I do have this pattern of immediately discounting the evidence. I'm quite good at making things, difficult things, look effortless. And if it was effortless, well, it was probably quite easy and therefore it didn't count. Or if I had to work hard for it, I probably threw too much at it and that doesn't count either. So I find myself playing all of these tricks. I was winging it. I was lucky. I was supported by a good team. I'm articulate, so I can come across as knowing a lot more than I actually know. And then I think, well, it's quite a neat little scam that my brain is running there. So the interesting thing about being a researcher is that I can spot the machinery that's going on in the background.
So you are your own petri dish.
Well, it doesn't mean that I don't still get caught up in it. I'm not walking around in a state of perfect psychological enlightenment all the time.
I'm so disappointed.
I really am human.
But on a serious note, if you think as to the version of you before you started your PhD versus the version of you now as you're well into it, can you see shifts for yourself along the way, given you are hyper mindful of everything around this mechanism?
It's more an acceptance of the idea that I will never feel like I know enough.
Okay.
So even once I have the PhD, which is still some years away, it's a lot of effort to get there, I will not know everything about the topic. That's the nature of a PhD. You only know a little bit more about this one thing. And nobody could hope to contain all of the knowledge of human achievement of all time. We can't be experts in every field. There's simply not enough time in our lives to do all of those things. We just have to choose the thing that is important to us, maybe have a passing knowledge of the other things, the things that are most critical, and then get on with trying to be a good person and do interesting work.
I remember hearing a story about Jim Rohn, the famous American writer and speaker, who was the predecessor to the Anthony Robbins of the world and all those kind of folks. And someone was talking about how Jim Rohn, who was in his 70s or 80s at this stage, came to a conference that the speaker, who was relaying the story to me, was talking. I said Jim Rohn was in the front row in his notebook writing down all these, and I was kind of going, what's he doing? So at the end of the show, Jim Rohn came backstage to congratulate him. He said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "You were taking all these notes. Like, what are you doing?" So I'm sure you've heard this, like I was quoting you. What are you doing? And he goes, for a long time in my life, I was really obsessed with I needed to know everything, and it caused me huge distress. And then eventually I realized, well, I'm never going to know everything. So I stopped learning. So this phase of my life, I'm realizing learning is the objective, nothing else. And so I get so excited when I hear someone say something that I've never come across before, because that goes, oh, that's something new that I've learned. He says sometimes it's a tiny thing, sometimes it's a major thing, sometimes it complements what I already knew. But I'm learning something new. I thought, well, that's a fantastic. I mean, when I was told that, I was probably in my 30s. And I didn't understand the relevance of it. I thought to myself, it's just an interesting story, but haha. I now kind of go, how cool is that? How cool that here's a guy who was held up to be a really cool educator and mentor for so long to so many people. And he's flipped his own thinking from, I am the expert on the stage, to, oh, cripes, I've stopped learning, to actually there's a joy that comes from learning. To the extent that he was still in his late 70s, 80s, filling his notebooks with insights and learnings in the front row of these conferences. How cool is that?
I love that. And I love the link to imposter feelings, because sometimes the imposter phenomenon can tell us that I'm only good enough if I know everything. And it's impossible to know everything. And actually, being a lifelong learner who is able to continue to take on new evidence and new insights and apply them and change the way we thought before, change the way we behaved before. So he went from trying to learn everything to not learning anything at all, to I'm going to absorb as much as I can, knowing that I will never be finished. Yep. 3 very different life stages, and he's not beating himself up about that change.
That's it.
He's excited to learn the new things that he can
there's a joy
learn.
there. Yeah, which is why he probably stayed so young for so long. Yeah. Erin, this has been fascinating. I knew it would be. We'll have to have you back a third time later on to see what else you can bring to us. What have I not asked you that is really important for us to know?
We've covered a lot of ground, but perhaps the most important thing is, what is it about the imposter phenomenon that people are not willing to let go of? Because I think a lot of people are clinging to feeling like an imposter for some reason. It's serving them in some way. Yep. They say they hate it, and they do, but when it comes to releasing that feeling or releasing the need to behave in response to that feeling, they're not ready to do so. They think it makes them sharper. They think it gives them an edge. They think it stops them from hubris or overconfidence. And yet it is impeding their performance in so many ways. And at what cost are they willing to continue to do this?
My last question for you today comes from a listener. We started a process a few weeks ago of alerting our listeners, say, we've got this guest coming on board, or we've got this topic coming on board. If you have any questions, just let us know. And a question that was sent in to be asked of you, the resident expert on imposterism and all things to do with that, is it possible that I can feel very competent and it doesn't have any kind of destructive impact on me at all in many aspects of my life? But in one aspect of my life, I can feel very imposter-oriented, and it does have an impact on me. So I'm not using competence in a way of over-functioning. I'm managing that quite well. But I actually find myself really doubting myself and therefore working really hard or working on the wrong things regularly in one aspect of my life.
This is a question that I get asked all the time. So we all hold these multiple different roles in life. We are workers, we're bosses, we're employees, we're business owners, we're parents, we are on sports teams, we're volunteers, we're community members, we're friends. And in certain aspects, we feel very confident and very capable. We feel very accepted. We feel a sense of belonging. We know that our contribution is valued. And then in other circumstances, we feel like imposters. We feel like we're faking it. So maybe you've been a highly successful business person, but then in midlife, you decide to take up running and you feel like an imposter every time you show up. You feel weird putting the bib on for the races. You feel like you're so slow and so shuffling and everybody's looking at you. Who's that old guy trying to fit in with the fit young things?
You talk to me?
Yeah, maybe it's at a yoga class. Maybe it's at a cooking class. Maybe it's when you're doing parent help at your child's school and you suddenly have this feeling of, I don't belong here. Or maybe you've done everything really well and then suddenly you're being asked to step onto a broader stage. So I'd bring it back to what I said last episode. Imposter feelings are the price you pay for growth. This is a sign that you're finding your edge again. You're trying something new. You're growing. So, okay, you feel like an imposter in this field. You can notice that, you can accept it, and you can decide to disrupt the dysfunctional cycle of behaviour and do what works for you anyway, to keep being a beginner, to keep not knowing until you do know, because one day you will know.
Brilliant. I love that. Erin Buttermore, always a pleasure to have you on the show. We have a downloadable guide for listeners to download from this episode based upon all of your wisdom. So for anyone who wants that, go onto the website, don'ttheoldmanin.com, and you'll find it there. Erin, can't wait to have you back a third time.
Thank you so much for having me, Pod. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe or like on any platform that you're watching or listening to. It means a lot to us. And if you have any comments, please drop them into the comment section. Of course, share this episode with your friends. We know they love that. And in the meantime, don't let the old man in.